Folks, thank you so much for tuning in Tuesday here. And you are going to want to hear why SpaceX sales, or at least the share value, has dropped. You're going to want to hear about what Madonna is going to be up to at the halftime show for the World Cup, and take a look at an amazing discovery just made in Egypt that casts some new light on the Bible. But let's jump right to it, jump to Trump, as we say. Today, there's going to be these primary elections. This is for our Canadian viewers. It's like a nomination race, and to see who's going to carry the party colors in some key election places in the US in November. And it's very interesting because in New York, and in a riding in Utah, and one in South Carolina, you're going to see a number where there are a number of candidates running. And in each of those cases, Mondami, the mayor of New York, has endorsed one of his party's candidates who are running against other Democrats. And in each of those, we also see President Trump has endorsed one. So far, we're seeing that Trump's record, even though his approval ratings are down, his record of getting wins by the person he endorses in a particular race is pretty high. He's hitting pretty high on those. We're going to see if Mondami on the Democrat side, if his endorsements are that valuable. It's going to be an interesting rollout there. Somewhere elsewhere, the US administration, and Trump especially, is making some surprising breakthroughs, is in going after some of the territory that China has been carving out for decades in terms of countries around the world, especially in Africa, which have rare earth or precious minerals which are used for all kinds of high-tech development. Everything that can be thought of in terms of AI production, high-grade weapons production. And China has had a policy which the US for quite a few years has just sat back on. China will go into these various countries, let's say in Africa, and they'll promise to build them roads, and to build them railways, and to build them all kinds of nice infrastructure, and to give their leaders money if they can have access to mining. And that's why, as it's shockingly come to light, in many countries, in terms of looking for rare minerals to help their own industries, are finding increasingly it's China who has the control of that. So quite interesting to see a breakthrough in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which has 80%, this may surprise you, 80% of the world's cobalt. Cobalt, very, very necessary rare mineral, rare earth mineral for all kinds of scientific development. If you don't have access to cobalt as a nation, you're going to be in trouble. 80% of it comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and China controls 80% of that, up until announcement just today that the US, with Trump's involvement, has actually landed a major mining territory from the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo for a US company. It's called Virtus, VIRTUS. For that company to have access, this is a major shock to China, that they have lost what has been virtually a stranglehold on cobalt production in the world. So very interesting. And also, with the US involvement, they say has come, the resulting there has been a ceasing of the war, the fighting between the Democratic Republic of Congo and forces, military forces from Rwanda. So the White House has kind of put together some kind of deal, got both countries to stop fighting, and in the process have acquired large access and access to cobalt mining. And that's an interesting development. Doesn't get a lot of mainstream media because it appears to be something positive that Trump has been able to negotiate there. We'll see how that continues to play out, and if it does get much reporting. Well, conflict or contrast that, let's jump to Chicago, where in the shadow of that huge monument to Barack Obama, and more critics are looking at it, regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republican. It's just deemed to be a pretty awkward looking building, nothing really architecturally inspiring about it. But anyway, in the shadow of that, in on South Chicago, very tragic weekend. Chicago usually leads the nation in shootings on a weekend and deaths on a weekend. 39 shootings, that's reported arrested shootings in Chicago this weekend, 4 dead. And again, very little media attention goes to the issue, the tragedy of mass shootings every weekend in Chicago. And Trump saying that he would bring in the National Guard points to the fact that when he brought in the National Guard into Washington, D.C. last year, it created a lot of controversy. We saw a lot of upset people on the news every night, but crime in Washington, D.C. has plummeted to record lows since the National Guard went in there and cleaned up some of the worst areas. Trump says he'll do that in Chicago. We'll see what happens. Well, the three main critics of the on the Democrat side and the Democrat Party in the United States, the ones who are most loudly calling for the elimination, if I can use that word in a careful way, of billionaires, of super rich people. This is Ilhan Omar and AOC, Alexandria Cortez, and Ro Khanna, who is from a representative from California, and they've been leading the charge on wanting to hugely accelerate the taxes on super rich people. And of course, every state, as we've shown, every city that raises taxes, people leave, jobs leave, poverty rates increase, and taxes drive people to other jurisdictions. But they are all now reeling because there's been a lot of it's kind of breakthrough reporting on the fact that each of those three, this is Ilhan Omar and AOC and Ro Khanna, are actually quite wealthy multi-millionaires. I'm not talking about they've got 5 million or so in the bank, but millionaires. Ro Khanna, the representative from California, who's the most vicious about going after the so-called rich people, his millionaire status is reported to be in the hundreds, possibly in the hundreds of millions. So they're finally taking a little heat. It's okay to take the money from the other guy, but keep their own. And interesting, they didn't make their money by creating jobs for people or by building businesses. They have acquired all their multi-millions by, being politicians. So interesting to watch. We'll see how that works out. In the whole issue of Democrats and their increasing shift to the left, of course, the Democratic Party is left of center. And this, people are wondering, is this just a little phenomenon that you're getting from the Democratic Socialists of America? That's a very severe left-leaning organization within the Democrat Party. When Mamdani got elected in New York City, to the surprise of many, somebody saw that as just kind of a one-off. Doesn't really show that there's been a severe shift to the left by the Democrats. But in fact, in the primaries now, remember, this is Democrats who are running for the nomination to run, let's say, for mayor. In the primaries to run for mayor of Washington, D.C., the candidate that just won there, the Democrat candidate, not just your run-of-the-mill Democrat, but severe left-leaning, coming from what's called the progressive Democrats. That progressive actually winds up being regressive when you look at how the economy gets hurt and jobs get lost when you have leftist socialist economic policies in place. But Janice George won the Democratic ticket there in Washington, D.C. And so when that mayoralty race eventually takes place, which is coming soon, it's almost certain that all of Washington, D.C. will go extremely left. The same thing, as we know, happened in Los Angeles. A member of the Democratic Socialists of America, not just the Democratic Party, Nithya Raman, we have talked about her winning, and she will be going up against Karen Bass as the mayor, who is already significantly left-leaning. So a real shift to the left in the already left-leaning Democrat Party. But other shifts are happening, and just want to confirm again, when we did our early morning broadcast yesterday, we said it looked like, as we predicted right here, we looked like the Espriella would be the new president of Colombia, and he was very openly supported by Trump. So that win is definitely seen as confirmed. And of course, now the left is saying that the election was rigged, but it looks like Mr. Espriella, Senor Espriella, will be firmly ensconced as president of Colombia, having received Trump's support very publicly there. Well, interesting with how things get reported, because in this very tragic situation that took place where in Montreal, where three people were killed in a shooting, one police officer, very tragic, citizen was also killed very tragically. The killer himself, it's when you look at the Canadian media reporting, they talked about his anti-feminine, anti-woman manifesto, and they call him an incel. An incel, when you hear that word, that means somebody who is not willingly, they are celibate, but in an involuntary way. So incels are supposed to be men who can't get dates, basically. And so the in part comes from it's involuntary and celibate. And that means usually they try and project that as some, severe far right leaning fanatic. And that's how the CBC continues to report the killer in this case, who was killed. But it's very interesting because his manifesto has been released and it's been public. CBC even has it, and they continue to try to indicate that he's some kind of right wing nut. Look, the guy was a nut, a complete psychopath, but his entire writings, almost the entirety of his writing, is focused on his support for very communistic, socialistic policies, and very opposed to anything that could be seen as freedom oriented or conservative type policies. So it's interesting, quite rightly, if somebody is on, I'll use the word again, the far right, and they're involved in a murder and identified as being far right, a Nazi supporter or something like that, that gets widely used. Far right, you hear all the time. You very rarely hear far left used when the person is far left. And in this case, the person was a far left individual who went and was responsible for these heartbreaking killings. I sure wish media would just report equally on all sides when these things are done. Nisha Patel, the reporter journalist, has an interesting piece of reporting about fast food stores or fast food restaurants in the US and some in Canada that are increasingly moving and using AI. When you pull up to order at the electronic window, in fact, you may not be talking to a real person, but you may be talking to, I guess the equivalent of an electronic robot taking your order. They have found that even though they still make mistakes, even though AI still makes mistakes, that the reports that the orders are delivered more efficiently, they are delivered more accurately. Also, you're not driving away and then looking in that brown paper bag and realizing they didn't put the hamburger in like they thought. But a lot of pushbacks happening from the unions. Remember, when unions unrealistically drive up labor rates and prices, businesses will find ways to get around unrealistically high costs. Jobs in fast food restaurants, which typically for decades were there to provide entry level occupation to especially young people or people who need job training, getting into the market and learning different skills. And when governments came along, and really the socialists came along and said that working at a fast food restaurant, you should be making enough money, to buy your own home, which was something that we never were aware of when I was working, or my friends were working in fast food restaurants. We always saw it as, first of all, it's an honorable place to work. I don't put down anybody who works in those fast food restaurants. A great way to learn customer skills and math skills, which you don't learn in school. And people are being pushed out of those jobs because of labor rates being forced higher. And unfortunately, I think you're going to see a continued trend there. So, and apparently there's even been cases where people will pull up and they'll try and disrupt the automatic AI so-called employee taking your order. They'll order like 100 cups of water, or they'll try and mess it up. And the AI robots seeming to be able to keep up even with some of the silliness that goes on. Well, the controversy continues. It's interesting how this could be a controversy. about when the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, does finally come to the final game, and the first time ever there being a halftime show. The tradition is that at halftime, which is only 15 minutes in soccer and football, at that halftime show, you listen to the various sports analysts talk about what happened in the first half, analyze the various plays. But it's going to be a halftime show, and it is confirmed Madonna is going to be on the show, and the Muppets are going to be there, so don't miss the Muppets. The BBC is now still sticking, almost quite upset. They're saying this is terrible, the tradition of just listening to the analysts at halftime and not, this materialistic approach to advertising products and to people singing. That's going to be turned on its head. But BBC is saying, no, we're not even going to tune in. Our viewers don't even have to watch this terrible American style halftime show. They can watch our really exciting sports analysts talk for 15 minutes. Let's see how the ratings are going to go on that 15-minute period. I think you and I would agree we know how that is going to go. Well, there are fascinating things happening too as we continue to watch the stock markets. People are saying and noticing that there was a drop, a 17% drop in share value of SpaceX after the all-time record in all-time history of that initial public offering, so-called IPO, which made SpaceX overnight about it was about a 1.8, they say, trillion, almost 2 trillion uh, dollar IPO, largest ever in history. And now they say, whoa, why is it dropping? Well, a couple of factors there. First of all, whenever there's been a hugely successful launch and things really bump up, as with the SpaceX, when that happens in the market, there are always a number of people who manage to gain on that, make a bunch of money, and then they look around and say, you know what, I don't know if it's going to stay this high, and they do a quick sell off of some of the stock to keep their gains. So that's part of it. But the other part is the fact that the markets in general today at opening, as we predicted yesterday, remember yesterday I took some time to talk about what we mean when you hear the 2-year Treasury bond. The 2-year Treasury bond is a signal about what people are thinking about the markets or where the markets are going to go in the months ahead. And remember, a bond is given to an organization, whether it's a bank or a pension fund, that's lending the government money. The government effectively writes on a bond and says, okay, you lend me $1 billion. Thank you very much. Here's your bond. And I will pay you X amount of percent while you buy that bond. So as uh, government spending increases and as things get a little bit shakier, people who are going to lend money to government saying, government, you're looking a little shaky here. So if I'm going to lend you money, I want a pretty good return on my money. And that's what increases what's called the yield on the bond. So the government is going to give that loan, is going to give that bond, but it's with some risk. And that 2-year bond is a little bit high and making people nervous. And that's why you're seeing around the world, and whenever the government is competing for investment money. So if I have, remember we talked about this yesterday, let's say I want I'm thinking about investing in the Ford Motor Company, and maybe Ford says, great, you invest in me, give me $1 billion, and I'll pay you maybe 7% a year. Well, that's okay. But automobiles can be risky too. And so when the government comes along and offers a bond that's, say, over 4%, many lenders are going to say, the government bond, it's a little bit less than Ford or some other private sector company, but it's more guaranteed because government has to pay. So I'm going to invest in the government. That makes investment in the stock market start to drop a little bit. And that's what we're seeing. We've seen this. And the main thing is inflation. There's a worry that the Federal Reserve, which is the organization that sets these rates, the rates that it's going to cost you as a consumer to borrow money, let's say for a house, there's some real concerns that the rates are not going to drop, that the interest rate will not drop, and that means the economy will slow down, and that's why you see a bit of a concern related to the stock market itself. we talk about Standard and Poor's. Remember that? It's called the S&P 500. That measurement dropped today at the opening bell in the markets. And that's, of course, raising some concerns in the EU, in the European market. Remember there, the brand that they use, the measurement is called Stocks, STOXX. That's a bunch of companies, and they watch how they are doing. Those shares dropped 1.2%. And the UK, with the Financial Times stock exchange, also dropping. Japan had a significant drop at the opening bell today. 3.6% is fairly significant. And what's really got people's attention in South Korea, remember that particular measurement is called the KOSPI, KOSPI, KOSPI or KOSPI. That actually fell 10%. So investment in South Korean markets and stocks went down 10%. As a matter of fact, at one point, they were getting worried in the stock market there. They actually stopped trading for a little while. They put a stop, meaning, whoa, 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 things are on slide. People are starting to panic. We don't want that to happen. So they just put things on all trading has to stop. And then people take a breath. They look around. They go, okay, maybe it's not so bad. And they open it up again. But a 10% drop there. And again, this is a concern. And government spending, remember, is always the single greatest cause and reason behind inflation. Let's do our little poet, even though it doesn't rhyme, our little mantra. What is the single greatest factor in inflation? The single greatest factor in inflation is government spending borrowed money. And all governments are borrowing money. And because people want to get reelected, they continue to just keep promising more and more free stuff because they don't want the media calling them nasty names. And so these costs continue to increase, and we'll see where that continues to go. Oil, of course, the WTI is staying down, is staying low, $73.70 today. And Brent oil, that's the stuff from the North Sea, 77.30. So on the one hand, you're saying, well, why is oil dropping? Because with the Strait of Hormuz being open, as it is, more oil is flowing, and anytime you have more of any kind of product in the market, the price will be lower. When there's less of something, then the price goes up. So oil is going to stay down, but these other factors are having a bit of a drag on the economy. We will see what happens and if the inflationary concerns continue. Well, it's been sort of interesting in Canada, where the Prime Minister, the Liberal Prime Minister, has been pushing Canadians closer and closer to China and snuggling up more and more to China. And some of us have been raising the concern, saying, criticizing the Liberals, saying you never go after China for its forced labor. Forced labor, of course, can allow products to be produced at a lower cost. Those products then get shipped into the market, and people might buy Chinese product because it's not always because of forced labor, but it can be a factor. And so forced labor is frowned on quite rightly anywhere in the world. So what we're seeing is the socialists in Canada and some of the unions are putting pressure on businesses who are buying certain products. Now, there can't be too many. It must be minute, but they're buying certain products that are made from people who are incarcerated in the Alabama prison system. A number of states, quite rightly, offer programs to the inmates where they can work, which is what they should do even when they're in jail, and be paid. And it's voluntary. And it has to reflect market realities. And so these products aren't huge, but it can be small certain parts that might go into putting a car together. It might be maybe the bumper of a car, or it might be some basic part. So the people who are making them, the people who've been charged with crimes and they're serving their time, but they're being trained in a certain area, they're learning how to build, they're learning how to work, and they get paid for it. And the labor unions in Canada are really going after Canadian businesses, saying you better not be buying any of these products that are being made by, as they say, forced labor. So left-wing labor unions going after any businesses that might be buying products from people who are serving time, even though it's a voluntary work program and those people are paid. But the labor unions not going after China, the Liberals not going after China, but they're going after people who are incarcerated and are trying to get rehabilitated. It's certainly an interesting approach there. Well, we'll see where that may or where that may not go. Just on a totally different front, talking about mayors of cities, the mayor of Nanaimo actually was getting so upset that so many people now are making and selling Nanaimo bars, which is the famously delicious treat first discovered, I suppose, and made in Nanaimo, British Columbia. He actually took to the airwaves and took to internet because all kinds of people are out there on the internet. They're making and selling Nanaimo bars, but they're pronouncing it Nanaimo or Nanimo or Nanaimo, and the mayor quite upset and getting out there and telling everybody, "I'm glad you love the bars that were originally made there, but folks, it's Nanaimo." All right, a little bit of just a sweet broadcast there. The Human Rights Museum in Canada in Winnipeg, the pressure is continuing to mount because they've got an exhibit, and we warned this was going to happen, and now it is happening. We talked about it last week. Their exhibit is to do with what's called the Nakba. That is the Muslim word, the Arab term for catastrophe, and that refers to what happened. Remember, 1947 and 1948, the United Nations finally recognized Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. And the day that the United Nations voted that into reality, all of the Muslim nations surrounding Israel said, "We are now going to destroy, we are going to annihilate Israel, we're going to kill all the Jews there." This was just with the memory of the Holocaust still so fresh in everybody's mind. And so the Muslim communities, those Muslim nations, urged Arabs who were living in Israel, they said, "You better get out because we're going to be attacking, we're going to annihilate everybody." About 400,000, the figure is disputed, but about 400,000 people left Israel. And at the same time, Arab nations, Muslim nations from around Israel were kicking out all the Jews out of the Muslim nations, and so about a million Jews. I think we might have said there might have been a number like 6 million kicked out of the Muslim nations, but it was around a million were kicked out of Muslim nations, and Israel, as a brand new country, had to absorb a million people, and they did that. That is hardly ever talked about. And then, of course, Israel shocked the world by defending itself and winning that war of independence. And the museum in Winnipeg is distinctly presenting from the Muslim side of things, completely ignoring the Jewish and the Israeli reality of having to survive as a brand new tiny nation against the attack of five giant nations, and a lot of concern. And now one of the board members of the Museum of Human Rights has resigned. We'll see if that continues. But the interesting part there is the Liberal minister, and this would of course be under direction of the Prime Minister, is saying, "Oh, we can't, we don't dare, we never would talk to a museum about how they're presenting a certain topic." Well, first of all, that's just not true. And secondly, if it was true, it would be a complete dereliction of duty. I can guarantee you, if some wacko far right group was having their message positively broadcast in a museum in Canada, the Liberals and any government would quite rightly move very swiftly to counter that. So that is a bogus claim by Prime Minister Carney that he can't intervene into this this completely unbalanced message coming out of the Human Rights Museum. And we now have a board member from there resigning. Let's see, in fact, if that goes anywhere. Somebody else who's stepping down, and definitely not from museum, but Jimmy Kimmel, not exactly a friend of Republicans or a friend of Donald Trump, has announced he's stepping aside for 2 months. I've got my own thoughts on why that is. And there'll be a series of guest appearances, and I think this is all designed to highlight the ongoing attack that some networks do on Republicans. And for instance, Jelly Roll will be one of the fill-in comedians, I guess. And of course, Rosie O'Donnell, the big announcement. She left the US a little while ago, a couple years ago, remember, in disgust, and she said she would never return. Well, she is returning because she's getting a shot on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. I guarantee you the ratings are going to be huge. From a monetary point of view, very smart move by that network. And from a political point of view, it's going to get interesting, especially as we come up to the midterm elections. Well, there are 6 by-elections coming up at the federal level in Canada, 6 that are going to have to be called with people who are announcing that they're going to be resigning. And once those are officially called, once the government says we are in fact calling these by-election, then those elections have to take place within 180 days. So some people are wondering, could the Liberals in fact lose their majority, even their slim majority in the House of Commons in Canada? They only have to win one of those 6 ridings to maintain even a slim majority. The Liberals right now, as Parliament closed for the summer, had 173 seats. The opposition had 169. Remember, the Liberals also gain one when the Speaker votes. If it's a tie, the Speaker will vote. That vote will go to the government. And there's been one announcement of a Conservative who's saying they won't be running again. So don't look to the Liberals losing their majority anytime soon based on those numbers. The other numbers that have got people upset from the Liberals in British Columbia, the real estate market is soft, to say the least. The condo market got overbuilt by developers, and there's 2,200 condos that were not selling. People had them on the market to sell, but the market is filled. And so rather than letting the natural way of things happen, where you leave things on the market long enough, nobody's buying, the price will come down and people will start to buy them. But developers would lose money. So rather than let the developers lose money, the Liberals moved in and have linked arms with the Premier of British Columbia and done something that is astounding. They've actually bought those condos from the developers who would have lost money if things had just been left alone. They say they're going to refurbish. Now they bought them, so they'll be refurbished, and it'll help the housing crisis. This is, again, unprecedented, and mainstream media just sits there twiddling their thumbs. Unbelievable that taxpayer dollars from across the country are going, the Liberals are taking that and giving that money to developers who were refusing to lower the prices of their condos, bailing them out, a massive bailout. And it's just about as shocking as you can get from a financial point of view. But of course, mainstream media just twiddles their thumbs because it's Liberals, so it's all beautiful. And unfortunately, it looks like the federal Liberals and the NDP may get away with doing that. There's another court ruling that has come out. The individual's name is Jaden Robinson, and he was convicted and found guilty and convicted of an armed robbery, and in this case, arming in a very fearsome way, or sorry, robbing a person at gunpoint of their vehicle. And the judge has come out saying that this is a person who has experienced racism and colonialism in their life, and so that person got about half the sentence that any other person would get. Listen, if there was bad treatment in jail, that's something that is an issue that needs to be looked at. If there is in fact cases of bad treatment, and we have all kinds of ways to investigate that. But on the issue is still the judge's comments. We're hearing this more and more in Canadian courts. People are being told, and this is a bad message to be sending out there for somebody who might think of committing a crime. I'll just use the words of the judge. If your descent, if your background was involved with, if you were affected by racism or colonialism, in other words, if you were Black or Indigenous, you're going to get a lighter sentence. Not a good message to be getting out there. It's a message that Liberal judges appointed by the Liberals have been taking forward. If that's not fixed, this is going to get very interesting. Talking about judges, as we predicted right here, if you were listening last week and even over the weekend, I made 1 or 2 predictions. I said one of these 2 names will be appointed very soon to the Supreme Court, and one of those 2 names was Glenn Joyal. Now, in fairness, yes, I'd like to try to sound like I'm such a great predictor. But if you remember from last week, regular listeners and viewers will know only 2 names were brought before by the advisory committee. There's a committee made up of people appointed by Liberals. It's an absolute fallacy to think it's an independent committee. It is not. The Liberals know through the appointment process that they will get Liberal judges appointed by virtue of the people they put on the committee, a majority of them being Liberal philosophically. And so there were only two names that the advisory committee brought forward. One of them was Glenn Joyal. And as I predicted, one of the two names, because there was only two, would be appointed. He's got significant Indigenous background and Indigenous sympathies, and now going to the Supreme Court. Mr. Joyal even claims ancestry with Louis Riel. So when it comes to things like will the Supreme Court overrule rulings like the Cowichan ruling, which has basically given half of the city of Richmond, British Columbia to the First Nations group, people said, well, the Supreme Court will fix that because this is a violation of property law, etc. Well, the chances of the Supreme Court doing that just went way down with this particular appointment. Nothing against Mr. Joyal, but those are his philosophical backgrounds and leanings. You might be interested to know that a massive report that's just come out relative to analyzing the earnings, the average earnings of Gen Z, so that would be people born in the 90s, compared with people born in the 80s. Matter of fact, going all the way back to the 50s, is saying that at the same age and at the same relative time, this analysis that's done by Guardian, the Guardian publication, shows that real wages being paid now to Gen Z are approximately 24% higher than those being earned in the 90s and even earlier by that same age cohort. So we need to remember media, especially left-leaning media, will always report from the point of view of wanting to sound like everything is a disaster. Sometimes it is a disaster and many times it isn't. But those 24-year-olds, 12% higher, 12%, I correct myself there, higher than their counterparts in the 80s, and that is holding true all the way back to the 50s. Interesting analysis coming out there. Well, Business Insider magazine, we talked last week about a massive online organization called Surf, and it's sort of seen as an improved dating app or a way where you can date under different circumstances. They've really been promoting Hyrox, which Hyrox, which is again another company online that promotes people getting together and meeting regarding working out or being involved in sports. And they have Hyrox is now in 85 cities in UK and US and some other countries, 85 cities, and they promote a certain type of sporting event where you sign up for this. Now it's a 77-minute event. And in that event, you run for 1 kilometer and then you do some high energy, high impact calisthenics that are prescribed. And then you run another kilometer and then you go back and you do a number of these exercises. And after 77 minutes, the winners are the ones who did the most exercises. So this German company, Hyrox, again, not just in 85 cities, but they have 650,000 subscribers, mainly Gen Z, 650,000 subscribers, choosing to hopefully hook up with somebody while either at a gym or doing some kind of athletic activity. And that particular event, which is promoted in many cities, it's not for free. You got to pay $200. They sell out very quickly. Interesting to see this new development as people seem to be, I don't know how it's going to last or how big the percentage, putting down the cell phones, putting on the running shoes and getting out there to meet each other. Well, the Egypt's Department of History and Antiquities, this is Egypt's Department of History and Antiquities, has done something rare. It's publicizing a very recent archaeological finding, which actually holds up the biblical authenticity of some of the accounts going way back in Genesis. Matter of fact, way back to talking about Joseph, who, as we know, was taken captive into Egypt, and then, of course, he rose to being prime minister. But they even make reference to the same city, a city that some people thought, for some period of time thought this could only be kind of an allegory. It couldn't have been a true city, but a city that was referred to in Genesis, where the wife of Joseph, remember Joseph worked for a guy named Potiphar. This was his daughter, referred directly, and it's a reference to Genesis chapter 41, verse 45. And it's very interesting that you have a Muslim government, their Department of History of Antiquity, saying, you know what, we can't deny this. This is definitely ties in with Jewish history way back in Egypt. Interesting, folks. History can actually be a pointing sign to the future. Let's see what more comes from this. Thanks for tuning in. Talk to you tomorrow.